I agree very much with Martin. I think this is going to get a lot worse before it gets better. The IMF is going to come up with their update this week, their global economic outlook. They're going to downgrade significantly their expectations for both this year and for next year. I think people have been playing catch up with how bad the politics and the political response has been domestically and internationally around the world in most cases to this pandemic, how geopolitically dysfunctional institutions have a hard time responding to a crisis of this scale, both on the healthcare side and the economic side, and the insecurity that comes with many political leaders as a consequence trying to balance their own domestic interests, their own political interests with a more effective response is quite disappointing in a lot of places. I'm also very excited to find out what Martin is keeping behind that red curtain. I assume he's going to reveal that at some point before the end of the panel. To answer the U.S.-China question broadly, I mean, Merritt, when you started off, you talked about how nationalism and populism is growing around the world. So first, a positive thing, that the one place that nationalism and populism is not growing right now is on the European continent. And that's because perhaps the single leader that has come out best from the last several months has been Angela Merkel, whose legacy was shot before this crisis hit, couldn't even put her own appointed successor, paved the way for AKK to become the next chancellor of Germany. Now she's over 80% approval. She's not been a cheerleader. She's had a fantastic both healthcare and economic response inside Germany, and also been able to take a leadership role across Europe as a whole, including real relief for the poorer, mostly Southern European states. And that has taken some of the wind out of the populist national sails across a lot of these countries. So that's some good news. But then there's some bad news, which is that that's not happening at all in the United States or China, who have in different ways mishandled this crisis significantly. And if you look at what companies are going to be doing the best coming out of this crisis, it's overwhelmingly the tech sector, where the Americans and Chinese dominate and the Europeans are virtually nowhere. And that's a problem, right? So on the one hand, you have Europe wanting to use its institutions to be more accountable, more responsible, take this crisis, use it as an opportunity not to break down, but actually build up. But the United States and China in very different position. And, you know, a lot of people in the United States are playing politics with Xi Jinping looking so strong out of this because, of course, their economy is not contracting this year. It's probably flat. Their supply chain back up and running quickly because of the ability to use a technologically empowered surveillance state to impose quarantine and mass scale testing. But this is the worst year that Xi Jinping has had since he's become president. And it's the worst year Trump has had since he's become president. And Trump is facing re-election, which is not going easily right now. And Xi Jinping is trying to get rid of term limits in 2022, allowing him to functionally be president for life. And there are a lot of senior Chinese leaders that are privately saying, not so sure that Xi should have a slam dunk for that. And I think that, look, there's not been any trust between the Americans and the Chinese for a very long time now. That's not new under Trump. That was true under Obama. But on top of that, you're now seeing politics of decoupling between those two countries, the two most important economies, most importantly on the technology side with competing systems that are fighting in a zero-sum way against each other. The cloud, Huawei on 5G, and big data and deep learning coming in two different systems, but also increasingly a lot of American corporations saying, we don't want the same manufacturing footprint for our companies that we've had historically in China. Peter Navarro, others saying that part of the bailout American companies should receive should be to ensure that jobs and capital comes to the United States, and the definition of strategic sectors in the US becoming more broad to include big pharma, to include PPE around medical supply chain, and going forward to include the vaccine as they are developed. All of this is going to intensify the conflict that we see between the United States and China. That's on top of an insecure Trump looking to lead investigations and blame the Chinese for the initial cover-up of this virus. That's on top of Xi Jinping engaging in the new national security law on Hong Kong, which also comes from a place of domestic political insecurity, pushing that right now, which is clearly going to lead to backlash, not only in Hong Kong, but more broadly internationally. We'll see in other places as well. So my belief is, despite the fact that there's a big opportunity that comes out of the world's largest common market, Europe, and the leadership we're seeing from Merkel, from von der Leyen, from Macron, and from others, unfortunately, the two largest single economies, the United States and China, are structurally moving towards much more geopolitical confrontation. I suspect we would even see that if Biden becomes president come January, but certainly the next few months are going to be particularly volatile and dangerous. And at a time, as Martin says, of the worst economic crisis of our lifetimes, you really don't want to see that kind of geopolitical backdrop.